Hang on, let me fix my hair.
Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out insightsinsound.com for a full list of our podcasts and YouTube series.
And big thanks to our sponsors, Mackie, Roland, Mojave Audio, Ozbot, Saramonic.
Welcome to Insights in Sound live from InfoComm in beautiful, steamy Orlando. I'm here with Sam Berkow, and we're just going to be all over the map, if that's okay with you.
Lead the way. I'll follow.
Well, I first want to start with a little bit of your background, because you have, similar to myself, a very sort of pinball-esque career.
Our mutual friend Kenny Berger looked at me one time and he said, circuitous is the best way to describe your career trajectory.
I like that. You know, it's funny. I have people who come to me and they don't say, like, you know, what do you do? They say, what do you do?
You do what?
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, the end question, the end goal here is how you ended up where you are now. Right. But I don't know how many steps we want to take between there.
I think
you know?
It goes back to two things: a sort of propensity or general feeling of comfort with technology and technical issues, liking to, like, multi-track recording is deconstructive listening, right?
Fair. Yeah.
I've been very deconstructive about engineering processes, electronic processes. I like that type of analysis. I knew I could never be a painter of fine art because it doesn't have that technical side. But I love photography.
Fair.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
I always thought maybe I'd be a photographer because it mixes the science and the art. And so I've always, since high school, found that I needed to have some sort of artistic portion to what I'm doing to balance the technical part.
Well, in our industry, it's the perfect mix of that.
That's exactly right. Although I got invited to a party with a very famous rock star, and we're at the party at his house in Northern California, and he pulled me aside and he goes, you know, it occurs to me, you're the geekiest guy at the cool party, and you're probably the coolest guy at the geeky party. And I don't think he meant it as a compliment.
But it is true.
It is true.
It is true in a way, because we're such a left brain, right brain mix,
right?
In a way, you know, and you know, that's the thing. I mean, I'm sure you come from a multi-track world,
right.
You know. But when we came up, this stuff was more about the content than the process, and that's almost flipped.
Yes.
In terms of, you know,
I would say by the time I was coming up in audio, the process had started to be developed. You needed a large format console. The thing that changed was that you didn't go to the studio for 6 months and work on an album.
Right.
You know, that you didn't prep the album in the studio, you prepped it someplace cheap.
Yeah.
Know? And then you could do rough mixes and some basic tracks and demos on your own. You know, for me, I wanted to be around musicians. I worked at before I went to grad school after college, I worked at a particle accelerator.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was great. At the Wilson Synchrotron Laboratory.
Okay.
And we were doing superconducting RF cavities.
Man, talking about geeking out.
It was it was great, and I got to meet some, you know, Nobel Prize winning physicists, and I got to hang out with really smart people, which I thought was great. The problems were apparent from the start. I've got some math chops, but not that level of math chops. Like, it just wasn't going to be there. I knew it. Like, I could study that stuff forever and just not get to that. The other thing was that I didn't like the parties. I didn't like the vibe. I wanted to be around musicians and musical things and hear music. And so I started mixing bands in high school and then college, and actually made a few dollars at it and really enjoyed it. But it also occurred to me I didn't want to be on tour. I didn't want to live in a tour bus.
Fair.
That wasn't something that I saw. And I got a chance to do some tour busing around, and, you know, a week here, 3 weeks there.
It's enough.
It
It's
was
enough to get
more
a taste
than
of
enough,
it.
yeah. And The other thing in those days, there was sort of an anti-intellectualism around audio. Audio attracted a lot of people who were very inspired to build their own systems. Really interesting systems. You bought drivers for them, and you built boxes.
Right, of course. When everybody cobbled together their own
That's right.
systems, yeah.
This fellow who was I'll think I'll conveniently forget his name, called me and said, "Come to Tulsa, and we want to talk to you." And I flew to Tulsa or somewhere in Oklahoma, and he said, "We want you to be our consultant liaison and convince people these package systems are a bad idea, that they should buy our horns and our low frequency devices, and that way you don't need one low frequency device for every horn. You could have 2 low frequency devices because the horns were more efficient in those days."
Okay.
But still are. But that's the point was that he was like a salmon swimming upstream. Like, he was determined. And I'm like, I don't believe that to be the case. Like, if you work in a theater, would you rather rig a box that has rigging points or start dealing with, wire and cable and then have to define your own crossovers? And this is just a bad idea. And so I sort of had a vision for where audio was headed. In
terms of self-contained systems, basically.
Self-contained systems. And by that point, ultrasound was working with Meyer, being their sort of prototype. This is what we want. We're going to come up with some ideas, pass them by you. You give us some drawings. So it's the Ultra Series stuff, the Ultra Monitor, the UPAs. And that was Don Pearson.
Of course. Dr. Don.
Dr. Don, who was best man at my wedding and a very lovely guy and my best friend.
Brilliant soul.
And that, what? That's as well as anyone said it. That's great. A brilliant soul. I'm going to steal that.
He was, and also just such a nice guy.
Such a good guy. And what's really fun is how many people consider him their mentor. And
I would agree. Yeah.
Here I was like, he's like, "Listen, my daughter's left home. She's, getting married. She's living down in Santa Barbara. Why don't you just leave some stuff in her bedroom, and you can use my house as your West Coast sort of home base." So I'd fly out there every chance I got to hang out with Don and hang out at Ultrasound, and which gave me access to shows and so that's when I started thinking about what could I do to be part of this world that was be meaningful. And it was very clear that system tuning was super important to Don. He was a big fan of the delta function and trying to do time alignment different ways. And
he understood that.
Yeah.
And he understood that on an intuitive level that I think a lot of people didn't necessarily understand. It's one thing to do the math.
Right.
It's another to say, how does it sound?
Right. And he was he worried about power and power conditioning and, how amplifiers would crap out and trying to lock the voltage and realizing that he had to break the seals on things so he could draw a current at the low part of the voltage cycle. He did a lot of crazy innovative things because he really had that level of insight. And, I just wanted to know why his sound system sounded the way they did, which I thought was better than 99% of other sound systems. It fit me. And he's like, part of it's the mandate from the band I worked for, which was, we want to be able to improvise and we want our audience to hear that. We don't want to go out and play tracks or have a click track or we want to feel it. We want the audience to interact with us and then we respond to them and they respond to us. We want our sound mixer to be sort of the sixth man,
Part of the band,
and
exactly.
That was at that time Dan Healy, who lived up to that pretty well.
Yeah.
I think Dan was, I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for his contribution to
and
world.
What's funny is, God bless John Mayer.
Right.
Brilliant man, absolutely. But I think without Dan and without Dr. Don, his products would be a lot different.
I think John would tell you that.
Yeah, I believe so too.
I don't think that, they were kind enough to name the theater at Meyer, the Don Pearson Theater, which, the first time I saw that sign, I cried. I was just like, it was great. I was like, wow, go Don. And it was funny because Don never won a lot of awards. He didn't really
He didn't get
care.
a lot of recognition.
Right. He
You
wasn't. He
know?
wasn't. He wasn't the kind of guy who was self promoting in that way. He
Hmm.
just wanted to do shows. You know.
He was a geeky dude in every sense, you know.
Yeah. I guess we were like two peas in a pod.
Uh-huh.
I really feel that I learned a lot, and a lot of the good things that I do now in terms of mentoring people and responding to questions. I have a forum that, I set up for a couple of hundred people,
Hmm.
and we have 50,000 people on this forum, and 35,000 of those are active users. It's like 5,000 people a day. It's crazy, much bigger than I ever thought it would be. And someone said, "Why are you doing this? There's no real monetization of it." And I said, "Someday I'll monetize it. It's, one of those things that I can worry about, you know."
Well, I mean, and granted, we're going to be all over the map
Right,
here because
right.
that's how both you and I operate. I know
Right,
that
right.
already. But I did want to get into a little bit of what you're doing in terms of teaching younger people, because that's something that's
Right.
near and dear to me. As you know, I'm chair of AESLA,
Right.
and I work a lot in education. I work a lot in educating younger people, and younger people coming into the industry, they need that kind of resource and understanding.
I do a bunch of things.
Mhm.
You mentioned AESLA. That was the first branch that ever invited me to fly out.
Uh-huh.
And I went to the Sportsman's Lodge and
Oh, I
gave
love
a
it.
talk on SMAART. And a lot of those people have been that I met that night were people I got to continue to know and still know. And so that's great. As far as teaching people, we recently, the core team of SIA, we had moved back to New York and we're working with Robert Director Associates. And it's a great company, nice people. You know, one of the managing partners was Mark Feldman, who I remain very friendly with, and I like a lot of the people there. But their mandate, now that Robert Director retired, didn't involve expanding the acoustics group, so it was time for me to leave. And
Okay,
so
fair.
instead of thinking about it, and we sort of trickled, and then as people started to think about leaving, we thought we should all sort of remain together. And it ended up at Henderson Engineering, which has 1,200, 1,300 employees in the United States.
Oh, so it's a tiny little firm. Okay, yeah.
Compared to IBM, it's a tiny little firm.
Sure.
Compared to most of the acoustical firms,
That's significant.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a great company. It really is. I'm very impressed with a lot of things they do. But I said, let's talk about my role here. And they go, we want to expand acoustics. We want, your resume. We want your contacts. We want you to, bring in some work. And that's
Sure.
been happening.
Of course.
I'm going to announce a new project next week that's
cool.
huge and wonderful for us. I've been really happy that maintaining good relationships with the people I was working with, RDA's brought some projects with it, and RDA's happy because I'm happy to work with them. They're happy to work with me. So it works out very nicely. But at Henderson, they said one of the things we want you to do is pick, a dozen people in the field in acoustics in different areas, and find out if any of them need or want mentorship.
Ah,
And so that's
nice.
really fun.
Nice.
Between that and the forum, the other thing is that I still get lots and lots and lots of questions about SMAART.
Yes.
It's
And
really,
let's dive into SMAART
Yeah,
for a
okay.
minute, because that's something. How the hell did that even happen?
this is crazy story, and what happened was, I wanted to measure concert halls for my master's thesis.
Okay.
I was at Stevens Institute of Technology, and I was working at Artec. And Artec was paying me part-time to do work and to be part of their team and go to grad school. And I said, all right, let's talk about it. So I sat around with the people who were there, and I said, what would be helpful for you to know? And we were doing these couple chamber designs that Russell Johnson had envisioned. The first one he built was at Penn State, and it didn't really work. It was unsuccessful because the openings were too small, the room was too wide, the chambers weren't big enough. And by the time I joined, they had built a number of rooms where the lower part of the stage house was acting as the reverb chamber with a flying ceiling and a moving tower of seating or sometimes not seating for upstage wall. So you had two configurations. You had a stage house configuration and a traditional concert configuration, which is interesting because that's the way concert halls, the Concertgebouw and the Vienna Verein, the hall in Vienna, and a number of the European halls, there's a concert hall and an opera house, and never the two should meet.
Right.
Right.
And which makes sense if that's a purpose-built venue.
That's right.
Right.
But in America, that people came over and built vaudeville houses, which had to have fly tower and wings so people could go on and off. You could have scenery and sets.
And so you could use them for a number of different applications.
But they didn't sound good as concert halls.
Right.
And so you were building sort of not really very good mixed-use buildings. And Russell was like, either build a concert hall or build a theater or build a hybrid which supports both and can configure. And Hamilton Place, and there's one in Colorado, and there's a bunch of them around. They still work, and they work well. The one in West Palm Beach, they never use it in concert configuration, even for concerts, because they lose 200 seats. Or 150 seats.
Okay.
So he was trying to figure out how to do it, and then the Meyerson Symphony Center and Symphony Hall in Birmingham. And
I remember that one.
Right. Yeah. Russell had these great ideas about coupled rooms, and Philadelphia, the Kimmel Center, and all of these great halls. And I decided to mathematically model the coupled chamber space and make measurements. The problem was there wasn't a measurement system that let you make very long impulse responses. The idea of these rooms is to get a very fast, tight decay early and a very long decay from these reverberation chambers that would wrap around the room.
Which makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it was a radical idea back then. And some people still have issues with it. Some people love it, and anything else that's not that is wrong. But I think the success of Symphony Hall in Birmingham with Simon Rattle as the conductor and the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, their hall, the Meyerson Symphony Center, shows that these are very effective designs.
Well, the Meyerson has been incredibly successful. That's got to be a calling card for you, definitely.
It's great.
You know.
And, I came in at the end of that, but I moved to Dallas and got to work on it a bunch and do a bunch of stuff there. And I.M. Pei was the architect, and we did some calculations for him. So he actually liked us because I had a mathematical modeling program I was using called MathCAD. And have you seen those?
Was this sort of the precursor to SMAART?
I met these people who read an article I wrote and said, hey, why don't you come visit us and talk about working with us? And they were in Boston, and they had some really cool things going on. But I was really focused on music at that point. I wanted to do something musical. And architectural acoustics was really drawing me. And the first thing I found was Artec needed a measurement guy. And, they didn't really have a measurement capability. So they had all these theories, but no way to quantify them effectively.
Right.
And so I started thinking about how to measure impulse responses. And one of the guys and I, a British guy, would sit down and talk about these things. And I basically learned a lot of the theory from him. And years later, when I was showing SMAART for the first time in an apartment on Union Square, I had like 15, 20 invited guests. And this guy that I didn't recognize with a beard was sitting next to someone I knew very well. And I couldn't place him. I knew him. And I'm showing, and he's like, how do you get an impulse response from pink noise? And I'm like, I recognize the voice. I'm like, is that you? He's like, yeah, hey, how are you? I said, I learned this from you. How can you be asking me this? I was like flabbergasted. I just, how sometimes you know something, but you don't know you know it?
Right.
Like,
right.
Unless someone asks you a specific question, can I get an impulse response from this?
Yeah.
And I walked them through it. I was like, wait till after this, I'll walk you through it. And then 5 people immediately raised their hand and said, no, walk us all through it. And so I did. And it was really, he's like, I just never thought of it like that.
Well, and that I think, again, if you want to talk the whole right brain, left brain thing, I think what's interesting to me is that you looked at this and thought about the whole idea of, on a bigger scale, predictive analysis, as something that in certain ways, everybody, once you said it, everybody was like, yeah, sure, of course. But before you said it, nobody was really thinking of it.
SIM had just come out.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
and I knew all the mathematics of that world pretty well at that point. And SIM was a great tool, but it was very expensive. It was like 50 grand.
It was also really kludgy.
Well, I don't know that it was
was
so
fiddly.
kludgy. It asked you to work the way they want you to work.
Right, okay.
Changing the way people work in audio is really hard.
Yes.
People are very dogmatic about measurement. They're very dogmatic about their workstation, their workflow.
Yeah.
Getting them to change requires some huge payoff for them.
Yes.
Because I'm comfortable doing it this way.
Right. I've been doing it this way for years.
I'm
and,
not giving up my NS10s.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Great analogy.
You know, listen, Al Schmidt with a pair of NS10s is going to mix better than 99% of us.
Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that everybody should use NS10s.
That's right.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that new monitors don't offer you a lot of insights and audible things that are helpful.
Yeah.
And so you have to look at it that way. I mean, you just can't get locked in. But SIM didn't let you measure the impulse response. Now, that being said, they were actually measuring impulse responses to get the delays, but they were only interested in looking at the interaction of the sound system in the room, which was more than anyone else had ever done, because TEF and all the other measurement systems that were popular in those days were trying to make semi-anechoic measurements on site. They were trying to remove the room so you could just see the loudspeaker.
Which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
You could argue till you were blue in the face. I'm going to say it. They're like TEF Moonies. You know, that's what we call them.
It's
and
interesting.
I got hate mail. Dick Heiser's rolling over in his grave. How can you teach this black magic voodoo nonsense? And I'm like, guys, measure it. It's either right or it's wrong, right? I mean, you can look at the evaluation of this measurement objectively. This isn't a subjective value. This isn't what sounds better. This is what's the frequency response that you hear. How well does it correlate with what you're hearing? And the great Japanese acoustician Ando had shown that at low frequencies, our ear has a very long time constant. And as you go up in frequency, so having a measurement that measures only the speaker at high frequency and increases the amount of interaction of the speaker in the room as you move down the spectrum, models to some degree the ear. Now,
makes sense.
It's not nearly as complex as the ear. We all know that.
Right.
But as a first pass, that's way cool. And the thing about SMAART is that people are like, wow, I hear that.
Well, the other point about this is you can't remove the room, because the room is
the room.
The room is the room.
That's also what you're hearing. And what
you're
right now, you can't EQ out reflections. And there was a big debate about that sentence, because a number of people showed that if you, in theory, you can, very short reflections, you can, but you never would.
And it's still not going to actually be getting rid of all the reflections.
That's right. It's 99% of them. But if you need to get rid of one specific, it's a thought experiment, and it has to do with stochastic processes and the ability to look at sound either digitally or analog. And one of the differences is that in the analog world, you can never do it. But because we look at blocks of data in the digital world, you can sort of hold things up long enough that you can do semi-predictive things and, take advantage of what's going to loop around. It's a very interesting, I should write it up again, because I haven't looked at this in years, but it was fun. And, I'm like, one's a thought experiment. One is a real world application. This idea of a sliding timescale. So when you see a transfer function in SMAART, even though you see one measurement, it's actually behind the scenes. There are 8 different measurements going on. They're being Frankenstein together. And so at high frequencies, you only hear the direct sound at the highest frequencies, and that's 1 millisecond time window or less. And then as you move down, it opens up to 3/4 of a second. And that's what your that's what your ear hears.
That's a huge spread.
It's very accurate. And what's funny is John Mayer and I, who I admired, and all I wanted to do was, I was in grad school, and it was like, I don't really want to work at Artec. I want to go work at Mayer Sound Lab. I never had the opportunity. It was never the right time for me or them or whatever. And I just wanted to work there because it was close to Don, and it was like, I held them in the highest regard. The thing was that the platform they set up for SIM had tons of DSP power,
Okay.
tons.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could add 456K chips. You know, it was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was they didn't have a lot of memory, so they had to work with very short segments.
Little short bursts.
And I realized, hey, wait a minute, I don't have to do things the way they're doing because I've got very fixed amount of processing. I don't have a lot of processing on a PC. We always thought we'd have to have a DSP for SMAART. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, wait a minute, I got tons of processing and I can just let data go if I don't need it. You know, I don't care.
Yeah.
And now, of course, real time is no problem.
Right.
But back then, and I remember the night very specifically that I was sitting there and I thought, I'm waiting on these boards and these chips to come in. Tony Agnello from Ariel was nice enough to send us some samples, and he's like, "Oh, take these boards, play with them." You know, he didn't care. He was great. It was so supportive, and it's such a wonderful thing for him to have done for me. I walked out of his office. I'd never met him before. I walked in. I said, "The folks at Bell Labs sent me here to talk to you. I'm interested in this." We sat around for a couple of hours. He goes, "Here, take this home. It's a $3,000 board."
Wow.
And he goes, "You should take this one and this one too." And I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Well, this chip has these features and this chip has these features, and see which one you like and send the other two back." And I remember that he was in New Jersey at the time. Oh, he was in Soho at the time, and I got on the subway to go home. And I'm sitting on the subway with $10,000 worth of DSP cards, which now, by the way, is about $500.
Right, I was going to say that's
but
back
I'm
then.
I'm
but
like,
yeah.
I'm on the subway with 10 grand worth of, you know, I didn't.
But of course, nobody knew what the hell you had in your hands.
That's
so,
right.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But still, the point is, it wasn't, you know, the
Yeah.
safest thing to do or the smartest thing. But anyway, I love those guys and for doing that. But I wanted to make impulse response measurements, and David Grisinger at Lexicon had a technique for doing it, and I started exploring that, but it didn't lock the time, the delay time exactly right.
But the Lexicon guys were among the first to do that, I think, weren't they?
David was a pioneer. I mean, it's my belief, and God forgive me if I offend anyone this, but without David Grisinger and his revolutionary reverb algorithms and his incredibly insightful work in taking stereo and spitting out 5.1 or 7.1 mixes, and then his later work in really true immersive audio, I don't think the immersive world would be anywhere near what it is. I think he was a mainstay of that.
Yeah, and we could dive into that, do a deep dive on the whole immersive thing, because that's, you know, which standard do you want to talk about today?
That's right.
But on a broader level, I think a huge percentage of the loudspeaker manufacturers in our industry today owe some kind of debt to your work.
I don't know about debt. I think that it's great that they use the tool that we built, and you know, the folks at Rational have taken over, and I had to make a decision in my career: do software development full time or go design Jazz at Lincoln Center. And to me, working with Wynton Marsalis, that's like, you know,
well,
I'm not saying no.
And not just that, but I think there's a huge reward in putting together those kind of venues,
Yes.
you know, and you know, gosh, you know, tons of respect to guys like you, John Storick, you know, others who have really contributed so much to designing these venues, because I think these are, you know, and you're one of the few people who has really mixed, you know, live and studio,
Right.
but these are temples of sound.
I like to think so. I mean, that's
You know,
that's
that's-
another good phrase that I haven't used, but I probably will now. I'm gonna have to do credits by.
All right, I love it.
You know,
I'll take a royalty, sure.
Yeah, I think you know, I'm not a great musician. I wish I was. I'm not. But I felt like I wanted to be around it, and I felt like I could contribute by mixing, and then I felt I could do design. And I can remember that moment too, where I sat around and I was underneath a console in New York City. A friend of mine had built a studio. He didn't like the way it sounded, and I'm measuring the voltages. We're putting sine waves in channels to see what's going on, and the output to make sure everything's balanced. And I realized it's not this equipment. The equipment's all fine. It's the room.
It, and that right there is the big thing about it. And it's funny because we talk about recording studios,
Right.
and I know you've had your share of those.
Yeah.
We talk about live spaces, and one of the things that is really so important about live, and I had this great conversation fairly recently with our mutual friend Robert Scoville.
Ah,
And
yes. By the way, just so you know, Scoville maxed out at 6 tech awards. And so I have 3 tech awards, and I consider myself half a Scoville.
Half a Scoville. I like that. That's sort of a measurement thing. Yeah.
That's a measurement
Yeah.
thing.
But one of the things that he and I talked about, because we both came through this, was when did you split off from, when did you make the decision live versus studio? Not a lot of people live in both worlds,
I started with concert halls, and I went to Russell, and I said, we are missing the boat at our tech. And he said, how so? And I was like, every concert hall should have a control room. They are recording studios.
Yes.
And this goes back to
Yes.
the late 80s, early 90s. And I was like, look, and it wasn't a lucrative job back then, for me anyway. And
Okay.
Russell was getting on, and I was like, there was a chance to move to Dallas and work on the Meyerson and design studios and other live venues with Jack Wrightson and the folks down there. And I moved to Dallas, and that firm, the Jordan Rose Group, sort of fell apart. And I figured I'd move back to New York and stay in Dallas for a year and write some software for some people I had met down there. And that sort of, the 2 guys had a company, and they were suing each other. It was a mess. And finally my girlfriend at the time said, why don't you just write this software yourself? And she's like, here, write a business plan. I don't know how to write a business plan. And she's like, it's really simple. What are you going to do? Who are you going to do it for? Who are you going to sell it to? Who's serving that community of people now? How are they reaching that community of people now? What's it take to get started? What's it take to... I'm like, whoa. Like, we got to write this down.
Right.
And it was incredibly great advice. Hardest thing I ever did. And I've told the story a number of times. I have an uncle who's was a very successful lawyer, now deceased. And I sent him my business plan. And I had worked on it for 2-3 months. I really worked on it. I really put a lot of work into it. And I called him up and I said, you got my business plan? He goes, yeah. I go, you got a few minutes to talk to me? He goes, yeah. He goes, you got a pen and paper? I go, okay, I do. And he goes, page 1, paragraph 1. What's DSP? I said, digital signal processing. Anyone who's going to read this knows that. He goes, I read it and I didn't know it. By the second or third paragraph, I was in tears.
Because he was just ripping the whole thing apart?
He was ripping me a new butthole. I mean, he was just like, where in this document can you show me that that's true? Like, where in your predictions is that included? How do you know that? Where does this come from? What kind of conjecture is this? And by the time I wrote down and responded to all his questions, I was like, I'm never going to get this done. And I spent 3 or 4 days really going through it and really working it and answering his questions. And when I went to try to find a distribution partner, which I realized was better than setting up my own distribution network, I went to JBL and started talking to them. I had talked to some other people as well. I talked to QSC. I talked to a few other people. But Mark Terry, who was running JBL at the time, goes, how do you know this is true? And I'm going, if you look at page 4.
So therefore you were grateful
incredibly grateful. But that's the game with those guys. They don't care how you feel when they rip your document apart. If you're going to show them a document, they're going to rip it apart. They're looking, you know, people are looking for, I learned this and I believe this to be true. Assuming you're talking to a qualified investor who has money, right? They're looking for reasons not to invest. they're not looking for reasons to invest. They invest with a person and a plan. If you're Elon Musk, I guess people invest in the person, but I'm going to guess he has some pretty strong people writing business plans for him. But in my experience, particularly for a startup, having a personality and having insight isn't enough. They want you to have your personality, your insight, and a real plan.
Okay.
That they can explains what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And you don't have to be prophetic. They don't expect you to see the future, but they expect.
But it has to make sense.
Right. It has to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that writing a business plan was the key to the success of SMAART, because we immediately could see what we thought we knew and what the world was actually like. Like
forced you to zoom out, basically, right?
And having my uncle review this document and rip me apart over it, forced me to answer questions that Mark Terry would ask. Every question he asked me was something I had heard before.
Well, because, and that's part of the fallacy that we, as people in this industry, face, is that we think everybody knows what we're talking about. We think everybody knows what DSP is.
Right.
And,
well, how about this? Do you think you can get a coherent definition of phase walking around this building?
Well, considering how many engineers are here?
Yeah.
And what's the old line? You ask 10 engineers, you get 20 opinions?
Well, it's a little bit crazy because phase is one of those things that many people understand, but they don't articulate well. Just getting people to differentiate between a polarity flip and phase is hard enough.
Yes. Yes.
Smart people say, "Oh yeah, it's out of phase," when they mean out of polarity.
Yes.
And
yes. And I've been corrected on that myself many
does
times.
Does it really matter? Yeah, it really does.
It
because,
does.
A polarity flip and one of the great patents is John Mayer's HD1 patent, where he talks about using all-pass filters to move the phase around to act as delays for the studio monitors. And I just love that patent. It's so deep. Like you could study that patent for years and find interesting things in it. And but the idea that you can use an all-pass filter as a delay is something that he and David Grisinger and many other people understand at a level where they were enhancing loudspeaker design using it. And David created a measurement system. We called it thwapping, where he took all-pass filters and ran them through all-pass filters and ran them through all-pass filters and then ran them through all-pass filters, and created this exponential thing that was an all-pass filter. Because if you all-pass an all-pass, you get an all-pass. And so he had this thing and went, whoop. So we called it thwapping. And he would pink it so it had more energy. And then he'd flip it around backwards and he'd play it through a system. What? I'm sorry. And then he'd flip it around backwards and play it through the same filters that created it, and you'd be left with the impulse response of your system under test, your room.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, if you think about it, it makes so much sense. This is going to smear it out at time, and you're going to come back and you're going to unsmear it out. But you're going to have this extra piece from whatever signal path you went through.
Exactly.
Whether it's
from
a
the
room
process.
or the process is perfect, or very close to it. I mean, just rounding errors. I mean, but you could if you start with a spike and you just turn it back, it comes back almost perfect. But if you run it through a room, the room response is there, and it's a very cool paper that really influenced me a lot, because I started thinking about these processes, and I started looking for ways to do it. And the dual FFT channel seemed to me the best one, because you could do it during a show using music. And if you could use music as a source, you could hear things. And I would measure an EQ, and people could see the EQ and listen to the difference. And that was a very powerful and sort of fun thing to do. But yeah, so I mean, for me, it always comes back to being around music, being part of that process to make music sound better, to make rooms more comfortable for people and more accurate for people. I'm working now with, I'm here at the show with Alan Sides from Ocean Way.
Of course.
And Alan's, I mean, what an ear.
I was going to say, there's another mad genius right there.
Oh my God, yeah. But what's interesting is he doesn't do measurements. He's not a measurement guy. And I'm like trying to get him into the measurement world.
Is he very intuitive? In
Oh,
terms
he's
of,
he's just
okay.
got the ear. He walks around. He's like, I
It's the
hear
impression
this.
I have of
Yeah.
him. Yeah.
He and I don't know that he really loved the idea of having a measurement-based person like me around at first, but it's been a thrill. It's been really fun working with him. He's just great, and uh, the amount of respect I have for his insight into sound. And that said, you know, it's funny. He's building some unusual loudspeakers, and they're performing well, and you know, I contributing to that process, so it's
Okay.
fun.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, a little intimidating to sit next to him and listen critically. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think again though, you're going back and forth here between the left brain and the right brain stuff a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, as I said at the outset, that's the nature of what we do. You know, we're using technology to enhance and create art.
I yeah, I think that's great.
And I think, you know, that is those rare people who can straddle both sides of that and understand both sides of that. Because, you know, there's plenty of people here. You know, you want to talk about engineers, there's plenty of people here who can design great systems. They can, you know, walk circles around us in terms of explaining the formulae,
Right.
but do they know how to listen?
Critical listening, when I mentor people, one of the first things I do is tell them, grab an RTA and carry it around with you and keep it on all the time and look at the frequency of your everyday life. Look at what, you know, what's your phone ring frequencies? What's your, you know, doorbell? What's your, you know, what are the things that you hear every day that you're not thinking of in terms of frequency content? And as you become accustomed to that, your ear gets trained because you know what 300 hertz is.
Yeah.
I can whistle 1K.
Uh-huh.
And the people are always, you know, it's like getting that frequency, knowing where it is. I shut your eyes, everyone. They shut their eyes. I'm like, whistle 1K. What frequency? 300, 2K. You know, it's like they don't know. And you know, taking it into the real world like that, I tell people, like, if you want to just do critical listening, just pick a song. Not something with 200 layers, but something with, you know, a vocal, a guitar, a bass, some drums. Listen to the drums, listen to the bass, listen to the vocal, listen to the guitar, you know, all the way through. Like, you know, and you're going to hate this song after 20 times.
Yeah.
But you're never going to be able to listen to it the same way because your ear is going to grab onto things.
Sure, and that's what I learned in, you know, in just studying engineering and recording, you know, is that critical listening aspect. I think that's even more prevalent now when you start getting into immersive.
Oh yeah.
You know, and you start getting into object based. You know,
It's interesting. One of the big questions about, we were just talking about this before we started this interview, was the use of the sphere and whether I think it's a good thing or not. And I'm really
Little of
torn.
both?
Yeah, I'm
Little
really
of both?
torn because the shows that I've seen and been able to talk to people about constructing them are challenging for the band. You know, and Joe Walsh wrote about that in his in a Rolling
challenging for
Stone.
the front of house too.
Way challenging for the front house and the system techs. On the other hand, I've never seen audiences so wrapped up in, so responsive, but they don't really care where the band is because they're not looking at the band.
Well, and you know, you can go in there and see U2 without seeing the band, right?
Well,
you know,
yeah, I mean, you just
Kinda,
have to
yeah.
remember, I saw the U2 show and I didn't find it to be a positive experience.
Okay.
I think that they went in and I don't think they realized how much time and effort you had to put into making a show sound. It was really loud. I found it strident, harsh. They refilmed it as a movie, and they haven't had a great success in people going to see it. I don't think. I don't know. I just feel like are we headed to a world where the band is playing in one venue and there are 6 venues worth of people watching it on a video screen? If it's in a really immersive screen, you know, which is, you know, overwhelmingly big,
right?
is that an experience that people want? And I don't know the answer to that.
I think it's a nice thing for a one-time experience. Is it something they're going to want to do every day or every time you go to a show? I don't
I
know.
will say that the rapt attention that the people pay to the shows that I've been at has been astoundingly fun.
Uh-huh.
Like really fun. And the video stuff is brilliant. But I'm gonna guess that with 18,000 seats as the Sphere, 5,000 of them feel connected to the physical band.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that because a lot of it is really just it's more the effects
It's
than the actual
the visuals.
experience. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 So that's yeah. It's a good time to be alive.
It is. It is. Now tell me this.
Yes.
This is a question that I usually wrap with almost everyone, and in
Right.
your case, it should be. I'm looking forward to this answer.
Okay. Let's.
Okay. You came up in a completely different era. You came up, as multi-track was happening,
Right.
and that, of course, changed the way we make music.
Yep.
Changed the whole process in terms of even, as that became, as digital became more interesting, live, changed all of that as well. So, what do you tell 15-year-old you coming up in this era with the technology we have now?
Use the technology to create better art. Like there's no rules. Like the thing is, there are so many things. People strive for things, and I'm not sure that they're striving for the right things. For example, there are lots of systems here where they self-tune the room.
Right.
And I'm not going to mention names, but I went to one and they played this beautiful stereo pair of speakers. Oh, lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. I want a pair of these.
Uh-huh.
Just, I don't know why I want them. Just they sounded so damn good.
Uh-huh.
And then they have a little processor that takes stereo in and spits it out to 5 of these things. So the stereo pair, one in the middle, one behind you, and 2 on the sides.
Okay.
And I went, oh my God, what did you do? It's like it took music and turned it into some sort of assaultive noise. Like the image went away, the feel went away, the soul went away. It was just sound everywhere for no reason. And there was stuff going on behind me and ahead of me, and none of it was in time. And the beat was gone, and the sense of motion. One of the things I love about songs, like when you're on a road trip, what kind of song do you want? One that moves.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like you don't want a slow, trudging song. Now, if you're at a funeral, a slow, trudging song is a wonderful thing. Or you got the blues, and you want to hear a trudging blues. I'm there,
But even there, you want it to develop.
Right.
Right.
That sense of motion, forward motion of moving.
Yeah.
That's so important. That sense of soulfulness, of musicality. It's very funny. I love long exploratory solos, whether it's jazz, rock. Do you ever listen to Marvin Gaye?
Mm-hmm.
You know any Marvin Gaye songs with really good solos?
Actually, no. Come to think of it. Yeah. Because it's all about the song.
Right. But I'm saying, those are some of the best songs I've ever heard. I mean, those are some of the best songs anyone's ever heard.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's just, I think there's something to be said about Marvin Gaye as just
Well, I have to
towering
laugh
songwriter.
because I was just having a conversation recently with a friend of mine, Matt Wallace, does a lot of immersive remixing now, a lot of Atmos remixing. And we were talking about the Marvin Gaye stuff because I heard some of the immersive stuff and I was like really disturbed by how it was handled. And, one of the things that we talked about is the whole idea of, I don't want to create a whole new environment. I want to use this as a tool, the immersive concept. I want to use that as a tool that is going to enhance the music. What I like about immersive, what I like about Atmos in particular, is that I get height.
Yes.
I can place something up there as opposed to over here,
Oh, it's great.
But I don't want to put it back there.
Well,
I don't want my background vocals behind me.
This is an interesting thing. I went to the Village Studios in LA, and Terry Beard had developed DTS for Steven Spielberg and that whole Jurassic Park and movie world. And, people were excited about it. And then he was going to have these music things. And I'm listening to a Pavarotti mix. And it's beautiful and it's big and there's height and it's width and it's immersive and wow. And then the castanets started playing behind me and I said, what the like what is that about?
Yeah.
Is that like for real? I said, that's not a mistake. And then they played another mix for me of a female singer who I really like, and there's a slapback off the balcony front. And I said, I got paid to remove that. Like,
yeah.
Like, I can tell you recorded this before this date because that reflection. Didn't you ever think to take it out? Like, why would you send that speaker? So, oh, we capture what's there. And I'm like, you don't have to capture a reflection that's hitting you in the back of the head.
What's there may not be what you want.
And you were sitting inside the piano. Now, everyone's heard the Eagles playing the round, which is great for an a cappella tune. It's amazing but once you add a band in, and the band's up there, and then there are vocals behind you, I can't understand that. It's very disturbing. I had this argument with someone, a musician I really like, who was doing Atmos remixes, and he's like, I want it to feel like people are sitting around the band. And I'm like, then move his guitar back where his vocal is. Move the other guitar over there. Oh no, just the vocals. I'm like, I find it, but again, it's a new world, so you got to try all these things.
Well, you got to try all these things. I one of the things that I found interesting once was the idea of, the immersive mix where you feel like you can walk around the stage. Like, okay, I'm standing in front of the drummer. I hear the drums right here. I move, the drums move, things like that. That's great for an experience, for a one-time thing. Do I want to experience a whole show like that? I don't know.
I think that this is the problem. When I listen to music, this sounds so horrible. I do enough critical listening at work, right? I don't do a lot of critical listening at home, although I have a new set of monitors that I'm two new sets of monitors.
Ooh, okay.
I have a pair of the Fulcrums and I have a pair of the Grimani systems.
Oh,
and I'm very excited about both of them because they're both great.
Yeah.
And the Fulcrum's the coax, and the Grimani's his very thin line. Really, both of them are special.
Well, Fulcrum's always been great at coax.
Yeah, well,
that's
David
the Dave
Gunnis
thing. Yeah,
he's great. I just spent some time with him this morning, and someone who.
I have a pair of those old Presonus ones that he designed.
Yeah, he's
the Scepters.
He's a real. It's funny because Alan Side's partner in the development of these speakers is Cliff Hendrickson. And Cliff Hendrickson hired two of my favorite audio guys, Mark Urita and Dave Gunnis.
Okay.
And so the three of us were all together today. It was very fun. I think that there's a sense that I love feeling like I'm contributing to the artistic sense and sensibility. And SMAART, there's a house manager who's like, I know that you use SMAART and like you're a listening guy, but I hate those guys who come in here and spend their time glued to their screen and don't listen. And I'm like, I never told people to do that. For me, measurement tools are supposed to help you understand what you're listening.
Yes, but they're not supposed to replace that.
No, they should not. And I don't think they ever do. And there are people who measure without listening. There's a couple of people who measure in control rooms away from the main room. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think that really works because that extra dB here or there makes a huge difference. When systems are tuned well, they respond to minor adjustments very disproportionately so.
Yes.
Like if the system's out of whack and you make a 1 dB change, you may or may not hear it. But when the system's really got its resonances and all the crossovers are set up and aligned and the thing's really, the phase is tight, tiny little changes become much more audible than they would have been in the other case.
Well, and the other point about it is you have to be there in the room. You have to be able to hear it. I went through this a lot of. I taught recording, and a lot of the kids, they're so busy looking at the waveforms.
Right.
And I said, you know what? What you need to do right now is close your eyes. Turn off the screen one way or another. If you have to just literally turn off the monitor, but close your eyes and actually listen. Go out in the room, hear what that instrument sounds like standing in front of it. Those are the intuitive factors that if you don't do that, you're not going to know then what you're adjusting on the screen.
Right.
It's not going to translate.
It's funny. The questions we can answer, tonal balance, positioning, gain structure, things that are objective reality
Right.
You know,
Right.
that there are different people. One of my favorite live engineers, and I'm gonna, other than Scoville and Morgan, of course, because
My buddies. Yeah.
two very good friends.
Yes.
Uh, is Dave Natal,
Okay.
and
Sure.
and
Another brilliant dude. Yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
but it's like if he needed a blood transfusion or some sort of blood work, you'd think he'd go out and pick leeches. I mean, he does it the oldest school way possible, always.
Yeah.
And you can't argue with the results. The best show I've ever heard at the Pearl at the Palms was Jeff Beck with Dave Natal mixing. And Dave, the word was, don't crowd Dave. He doesn't want any guests in front of the house. He doesn't want anyone around the console. Leave him alone. So they said, listen, we don't have any seats. It's a sold out show. I happen to be in Vegas, and they put me at front of house where their guy measures the SPL. And Dave walked out. He recognized me. Sam, yeah. Oh, hey, Dave. How are you? Does he want to come sit next to me? And what a thrill, right?
Right.
And
Wow.
I wouldn't do anything the way Dave does it. And I don't think I would get as good a mix anyway. Because I think with all the modern tools, he is so locked into what this gear that he knows does and what he wants to achieve and how he wants to achieve it. He's just on another level. And Dave Morgan was the same way.
Dave Morgan, Buford Jones,
Buford
same
Jones.
thing. You know, a lot of those guys because they came up without it.
Dave Morgan, I said, Dave, what do I have to do to convince you to use SMAART? He goes, put me on a system where it sucks. And I can't
Sounds
figure
like
out how to
Dave.
make it not suck. And I'll do it. And then about a year later, my phone rang. He said, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, well, he goes, get on a plane. And, you know, I went and I brought SMAART and I was like, let me sort this out for you. And I sorted it out. And he's like, that's what SMAART's great for. You know,
Fair.
I was doing a Broadway show that brought me in to do the tuning, and he goes, "We're not ready for you because the center cluster is all out of whack." And I was like, "Why don't we use SMAART to unwhack your center cluster?" And the guy's like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they had been working on it for 4 or 5 hours. And it turned out it was a weird gain structure issue and blah blah. And I was like, "Look, here are the curves. Like, just do this, do this, do this." And 30 minutes later, we figured it out. And people, oh, wow. And you could see the cranks turning in their head. One of the things is you got to sort of experience what people do with different tools. Like, do I think
Sure.
other people could use Dave Natal's techniques without Dave's experience or ear? No,
No, of course not.
I don't think so.
Of course not.
I tried to build tools that help us all be a little bit more Natal-like. You know what I mean? A little
Yeah.
more Scoville-like.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
little more Morgan-like.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that helps.
Well, and I think that, you know, that comes full circle to what we were talking about the whole idea of left brain, right brain, because
Right.
what you're doing is you're appealing to that intuitive sense of this is how I mix. I mix for what I hear,
Right.
you know?
When music sounds good, it just hits you, and when it doesn't, you're just so disappointed.
Yeah.
You know? It's like
yeah.
it's like you could be excited by the energy of the band or the energy of the music, but if you can't comprehend vocals, if it's just a
Yeah.
the room's boomy and someone complained to me yesterday that they went to see a show and the house engineer had the bass so far up front that it's so big, and it was sort of like a folk artist, and he's like, the audience was in their 50s and 60s, and who's this guy mixing?
Yeah, I don't want to hear that.
Right.
I don't want to hear hip hop bass when I've got
And
three
so-
mandolins on stage, you know?
And on the other hand, everyone crosses over. Bluegrass is becoming rock and roll.
Yeah.
Country has got a hip hop and a bluegrass sensibility to it now.
Yeah.
So you got to sort of find where you are and make sure you know where you are
Well,
for the type of.
you know, Buford
Sound.
said something to me once that I thought was really, really succinct about it. He said, you know what? We're here to sell the record, you know, and therefore we want to get close to the record experience, but we want to give them that extra little oomph that gives them the pleasure of seeing it live, you know? It's like, I don't want to go to a show and hear the record. I want to go to, but I also don't want to go to a show. I don't want to see, you know, Eric Clapton completely rearrange a song, or Bob Dylan, you know, completely to where I have to go, what the hell song is that?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, then don't go see Bob.
Oh, I
because
know,
he's,
right? Well, Bob is famous for that.
You know what? You know what? I take the opposite approach. If you want to hear the hits, play the record.
Well,
You
fair
know,
enough.
it's like,
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. Because I think that's his left brain, right brain.
Well,
split, is that
absolutely.
I want to explore this music. I wrote it 40 years ago, and I want to go back and play it through the me of today.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not disparaging that
Right.
as a practice, but what I'm saying is that what your audience expects, if you're selling tickets to something, the audience is going there to hear that experience.
Right, and I
you
think
know?
Bob Dylan, over the course of his entire career, has not given a rat's ass about what his audience expects.
And that's Dylan, you
Right.
know.
But
But-
it's a lot of people, and this is a theory that I've heard from people, that if you go out and do a show and you play the hits, and what you're saying is, I'm going to take the songs that could fail, and I'm going to eliminate most of those, and I'm going to take the peaks of improvisational music when it all comes together, and we're going to lock it in here and here. This show is never going to suck, and it's never going to be great.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Yeah.
entertainment.
Yep. But that's what people want to pay.
Depends on who you are. Now, you have other situations where the artist is exploring a different genre. Harry Connick did this once, where
Sure.
he was playing a subscription series at performing arts centers, and he came out and was doing music that no one knew, and there was mass confusion. And
Sure.
I was confused because I didn't even know he played that kind of music.
Lots of artists used to do that. You know, Prince did that.
Yeah.
David Bowie. You know, I mean, artists who would come out and do something completely different every time they went on tour.
Right.
And you know, God bless them. I mean, those are the artists that intrigue artists like me.
Right.
You
and
know,
me.
because exactly, because we want that. But I'm also acknowledging here that every one of those artists, to pay the bills, they have to do something expected.
I was introduced to jazz music by a number of people, but one of them, perhaps most notably, the great guitarist Ben Mundar.
Okay.
Ben plays with the Bad Plus these days, which is incredibly worth seeing because he's great, and he's been with them for a couple of years, and they've had other guests that stay with them for 6 months, and this seems like it's an ongoing thing. It's a great fit, and Ben's super talented, and he took me to see Dave Liebman, Richie Byrack, George Mraz, and Al Foster at
Wow.
7th Avenue South.
Wow.
First jazz club I ever went to.
Okay.
And it was upstairs, and we went on a Saturday night. And I walked in, and these guys started playing, and wow, they're weaving stuff and melodies and harmonies, and Al Foster's throwing in all these odd polyrhythms, and Dave Liebman's playing soprano sax, and oh my God, George Mraz on bass was mesmerizing. I couldn't believe it. And I love this. So I was dating some girl, and I was like, we got to go see these guys again tomorrow night. You got to hear this. It's like unbelievable. They weave melodies. They do all this cool polyrhythmic shit. It's like, oh my God. It's like, you know, my head was exploding. I was so excited. And we walk in, and, you know, George is he's not even there, Al Foster. And he shows up late. He's throwing his cymbals up. And they played 45 minutes of the most out music I've ever heard in my life. There's nothing like
Just
Saturday
free-form
night.
stuff?
Totally freeform, totally out there, honking. And the woman looks at me, she goes, if you're not taking me home now, I'm getting a cab and leaving anyway. I said, let's wait a little bit and see. And no one's staying. And the guy comes out and says, if you'd like to stay for the next set, there's no cover charge. So I said, let's stay. And she's like, I don't want to hear any more of this shit. I said, I'm going to ask him about it. And he walks by me, Dave Liebman, and I go into a restroom, of course, and using the facilities, and I'm washing my hands. He's washing his hands. I say, hey, that was really interesting. I was here last night, and you played this beautiful melodic music. And tonight, not so much. You know? And he looked at me and goes, yeah, Saturday nights we play for the Saturday night audience. Sunday nights, our time. And I was like,
Ah.
wow, like that's pretty
Okay.
interesting. Like,
Okay.
he's like, the people who come out on Sunday are much more adventurous listeners. And Sunday and Monday night became my go out nights in New York City to hear jazz.
Did you get a second date with this woman?
Not so much. I think she was more of a classic rock girl at that time.
Uh-huh.
But you know, it
Yeah.
was, but David Murray, a great saxophonist, had a big band, which was an improvisational big band, which Butch Morris used to conduct.
Mm-hmm.
And they played Monday nights for a couple of years at the Knitting Factory. And I tried to go as many Monday nights as I could. And they started playing at 9 o'clock. And they played till 9 to 1 on a Monday night. And that's an adventurous music crowd, you know, in
Sure.
Tribeca in those
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
And it was great. I loved it. I just thought James Spaulding was in that band, and all these amazing, the guys from the World Saxophone Quartet.
Uh-huh.
Just incredible musicianship. But it was all improvisational, and you had to be willing to note that some nights it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And I had worked on the design of that room a little bit and helped with the isolation of the speakers and tuning it. And it was, for me, it felt like I was coming into a room that I participated in, and I was helping these guys find their sound.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if that's really true, but at least, you know, I thought it was true. And I loved it. And years later, I talked Steve Bernstein into playing with his Millennial Territorial Orchestra on Monday nights. And I'm like, you're going to have a great crowd, man. There's adventurous music people in New York City. I come out on Monday nights. And they did really well. I think they played 2.5 years. At
Wow.
the Knitting Factory. It was really fun.
Mhm.
But when I interviewed for the SF Jazz Center job, the SF Jazz offices were in the Embarcadero in San Francisco. And I went down there and I looked at the guy at the reception desk, and it was someone I knew, a saxophonist named Dave Ellis. And Dave had played in a bunch of jazz bands. He had a great record called The Long Run, which I thought was a really good jazz record. And he was now playing in a semi-improvisational rock band, a jam band type situation.
Okay.
And he needed to take some personal time off and took this job just to have some work when he came back from his time off. And I was so happy to see him, and I'm like, you know, you look like a lot like a guy I used to know played saxophone. You look like a guy who wished he played saxophone. And a big hug, you know.
I love it.
He was great. Really a great guy.
Uh-huh.
And they walked in, and they said, the interviewer said, we're going to ask you some questions. We'd like you to give us some. Why should we hire you and not someone else? I said, I'm your audience. I go out to hear music. I pay money at the door to hear music.
Fair point.
One of the good perks
Uh-huh.
of my job is I don't have to pay money at
Right,
music to hear a
right.
lot of shows.
Mm-hmm.
Still pay for some, but I love that a lot of venues I've worked on welcome me, and I'm very appreciative. I never try to abuse that.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, well, like, what else? And I'm like, I'm the only one you're going to interview who knows that your receptionist is a killer tenor player and an even better baritone player. And I said he should stop playing tenor and just play baritone.
Ooh, strong words. Okay.
You know,
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
and they're, you know, and I'm like, look, you know, there are a lot of people who can design a venue, but since I'm designing this for my friends who play and for my friends and I who go to hear music, we have a unique perspective, our team, because we're all musical.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
at the end of the day, the difference in good products and bad products here, are they musical?
Are they musical? Are they designed by people who understand that right brain component as opposed to engineers? I love engineers. We wouldn't be here without them. But so many engineers are so far removed from that creative process.
Should we wrap this up, or should I tell you one last story?
By all means, tell
I
me
got
one
one
last
last story. The first time we showed SMAART at a trade show was AES. No, it was NSCA. But the first time we really, NSCA was small in those days. It was in St. Louis that year.
I remember NSCA.
yeah.
Used to
And-
be a great show.
Yeah, yeah. And we showed it to a few people. It was great. But I had a booth. I was in someone's booth, and we had our own little table area. And there was SMAART, big screen, and I had left the booth to go, I don't know, use the restroom, I don't know, something. And I was going to be back in 20 minutes. So the programmer I hired, who knows nothing about audio, right? He was a Bell Labs guy. I was at Bell Labs for a while. I got to work there, and he was the best programmer I knew, but he didn't know anything about audio. And someone I had asked to come to the booth and see the product, and, hey, we're here, blah, blah. Can you give us a demo? And my girlfriend was there. She goes, well, Sam left. And she looks at David. She says, can you do a demo? He goes, I don't know how to work this thing. I don't know what it does. I know how it works inside, but I don't know what you connect it to and what that means. I haven't got a clue. And I said, that's why I hired him. I don't want an audio guy. I want someone who like geeks out on code.
Yeah, okay.
And I always thought that was really funny. Like, I think there should be someone who is understanding who's going to use it, how they're going to use it, why they're going to use it.
And what the expectations are.
Right.
I think that's the big thing right there, you know, because I've seen so many products rolled out that they didn't consult with the end user on. Yeah. And that was a mistake, you know.
That would be the Cybertruck.
There's one. There's one. You know?
I'm like, they built these great cars, and then they built the Cybertruck. We don't do customers, you know, response stuff. I'm like, maybe you should.
But yeah, well, that's another whole ball of wax there.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope
thank
this
you for being
has
my
been
guest.
fun and
absolutely
makes sense. And
well, you know, I expected us to be all over the map, and
there you go.
And we are. So there you go. Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.